It was a Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. In Hawaii, the air was warm and the sky was clear. American sailors and soldiers were waking up thinking about church or maybe a baseball game later in the day. No one saw it coming. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. Over the horizon, hundreds of Japanese planes were flying in, ready to strike a devastating blow. They were aiming for the heart of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, anchored peacefully at Pearl Harbor. It was a moment that would change everything, not just for those on the island but for every single American. The attack was sudden and brutal. The first wave of bombers screamed out of the sky. The first wave of fighter planes screamed out of the sky. Torpedoes sliced through the calm harbor waters, finding their targets with deadly precision. Explosions rocked the battleships, sending fire and black smoke billowing into the air. The USS Arizona, a mighty vessel, was hit by a bomb that ignited its forward magazine. It exploded violently and sank in minutes, taking over 1,100 men with it. The surprise was total. The chaos was unimaginable. For a few terrifying hours, America was under attack on its own soil, and the world held its breath. When the news reached the mainland, it spread like wildfire. Radios crackled with the shocking reports. People gathered on street corners, in diners, and in their living rooms, trying to make sense of the unbelievable. A feeling of disbelief quickly turned to anger. Then, it turned into a steely resolve. The attack on Pearl Harbor did more than just sink ships. It shattered America's sense of isolation. It broke the idea that we were safe from the wars raging across the oceans. With the declaration of war, America transformed. It was, honestly, an incredible sight to see. The country that was just coming out of the Great Depression had to become the world's greatest military and industrial power. And it had to do it fast. President Roosevelt had called America the arsenal of democracy even before the attack. Now it was time to prove it. Factories that once made cars started making tanks, airplanes. Shipyards that were quiet began working around the clock, building destroyers, aircraft carriers. The entire nation was put on a war footing. Every corner of American life was touched by the war effort. Young men from every state, from big cities and small farms, lined up at recruiting stations. They were eager to serve their country. Millions would eventually put on a uniform and go overseas to fight. Back home, life changed dramatically. Things we take for granted were suddenly rationed. You needed government-issued stamps to buy sugar, coffee, meat, gasoline. Everyone was asked to sacrifice. People planted victory gardens to grow their own vegetables so that more food could be sent to the troops. It was a time of shared purpose. One of the biggest changes happened in the workforce. With so many men gone to fight, someone had to keep the factories running. That someone was millions of American women. They stepped up like never before. Welders, riveters, mechanics. The famous Rosie the Riveter poster became a symbol of this incredible contribution. They built the very planes and ships their husbands, brothers, sons would use in battle. These women proved they could do the jobs just as well as men, forever changing the role of women in American society. America found itself fighting a war on two opposite sides of the world. It was a massive undertaking. In the Pacific, the goal was to push back the Japanese Empire, island by island. In Europe, the mission was to defeat Nazi Germany and its allies. Each front had its own brutal challenges. The Pacific was a war of vast distances, fought on tiny jungle-covered islands, and fought across the open ocean. The war in Europe was a grinding land war, fought through forests, fought across rivers, and fought in the bombed-out streets of ancient cities. American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines were sent to face danger in places they had only ever read about in books. In the Pacific, the early days after Pearl Harbor were tough. The tide began to turn at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. It was a stunning victory for the U.S. Navy. Using skill and a bit of luck, American dive bombers sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. This victory stopped Japan's advance. It put the Allies on the offensive. From there, it was a long, hard slog. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The fighting was close and personal, in terrible conditions. Each island taken was a stepping stone, getting American forces closer to Japan. Meanwhile, in Europe, American troops joined the fight against Hitler. After fighting in North Africa and Italy, the main event was coming. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history was launched. American troops, British troops, Canadian troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. Omaha Beach saw horrific fighting and terrible casualties. But the soldiers pushed through. This invasion created a crucial second front, forcing Germany to fight on both sides. From Normandy, the Allies began the long, bloody push across France toward Germany. The final year of the war saw some of the toughest fighting. The Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944 was Germany's last desperate gamble. American soldiers, surrounded and undersupplied in freezing cold, refused to break. They held the line. In the Pacific, the closer we got to Japan, the more fanatically the Japanese soldiers fought. These battles showed the incredible courage and resilience of the American fighting man. They were far from home, facing determined enemies, but they kept pushing forward battle by battle, until victory was within reach. The end of the war came in two stages. In Europe, after the Battle of the Bulge, Allied armies pushed into Germany from the west. The Soviet Union advanced from the east. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The day was celebrated as VE Day, Victory in Europe. Across America, people poured into the streets cheering and celebrating, but the job was only half done. The war in the Pacific was still raging. An invasion of Japan would have cost enormous lives on both sides. President Truman faced a terrible choice. A new, terrifying weapon had been developed in secret: the atomic bomb. He had to decide whether to use it to force a quick surrender and save hundreds of thousands of American lives. In August 1945, he made the decision. An atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, another was dropped on Nagasaki. The devastation was immense. A few days later, on August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. The formal surrender was signed on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was finally over. America emerged from the war as a completely different country. The war had pulled us out of the Great Depression. It turned us into the world's leading economic and military superpower. Millions of soldiers came home and could go to college. Many bought homes thanks to the GI Bill. That helped create a booming middle class. The country felt a new sense of confidence and possibility. But we also carried the heavy weight of leadership. The United States could no longer retreat into isolation. We had to help rebuild a shattered world, and we had to lead the new United Nations to try to prevent such a war again. The war changed the world forever. It ended the age of empires. It began the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. It ushered in the atomic age, with promise and peril. Most importantly, it was a victory for freedom and democracy over tyranny. It was won by the sacrifice and determination of a generation of Americans. They fought on the front lines, they worked in the factories, they showed what a united country could achieve. Their story reminds us that ordinary people can come together to defend our ideals, shaping the course of history for generations to come. The war was won by millions of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but it was also guided by strong leaders who had to make world-changing decisions. At the very top was President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He led the country through the Depression and then through most of the war. His fireside chats on the radio gave people hope and strength. He was a steady hand on the wheel during a very stormy time. After his death in April 1945, just weeks before victory in Europe, his vice president, Harry S. Truman, stepped in. Truman was a plain-spoken man who had to make some of the most difficult decisions of the entire war. On the military side, America had brilliant commanders. In Europe, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander. He wasn't just a great general, he was a great diplomat. He had the tough job of managing all the different Allied armies and handling strong personalities like General George S. Patton, a bold and aggressive tank commander who led his Third Army in a rapid advance across France. In the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur led the Army's island-hopping campaign, famously vowing, "I shall return to the Philippines." And he did. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded the vast U.S. Navy, masterminding the strategy that crippled the Japanese fleet. But the story of the war is really the story of the G.I. Joe, the everyday soldier. They were kids from Brooklyn and farmers from Iowa. They were the ones who waded ashore at Normandy, who fought in the jungles of Guadalcanal, and who flew the bombing missions over Germany. Heroes came from every background. There were the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of African-American pilots who flew with incredible skill and bravery, escorting bombers and never losing a single one to enemy fighters. There were the Navajo Code Talkers, Marines who used their native language to create an unbreakable code that was vital to success in the Pacific. These heroes were not just the ones who saw combat. They were the medics who ran into gunfire to save a wounded comrade. They were the sailors on merchant marine ships who braved German U-boats to deliver supplies. They were the nurses who worked tirelessly in field hospitals close to the front lines. This generation of Americans, often called the greatest generation, faced the ultimate test. They didn't ask for the war, but when it came, they answered the call with a quiet courage and a sense of duty that saved the world. Their legacy is one of service and sacrifice.